Renewable resource systems have been a part of trading card game design since the birth of the genre. Widely recognized as the first trading card game, Magic the Gathering uses land cards that can be played once per turn, tapped for mana to pay for costs and effects, and that then untap at the beginning of the next turn ready to be used again. As you play land after land and they all untap at the beginning of each of your turns, you find an overall linear increase of resources turn over turn, leading to each turn having more resources to use than the turn before it. Over the years, one consistent criticism of this system is that having specific resource cards can lead to an imbalance of resources, leading to either too many, which is mana flood, or too few, which is mana screw. In either case, ending the game not due to player inputs, but rather due to poor luck that doesn't allow one of the players to play out their cards. Probably the most notable attempt to fix this flaw in the system is Duel Masters. The resource system is nearly identical, but instead of requiring specific resource cards, it allows for any card to be played as a resource. This removes most of the luck-based elements from resource development and is widely regarded as a good move. Many games since then have adopted mana systems heavily inspired by Duel Masters, such as ZX and Build Divide. However, issues of mana screw and mana flood may have been hiding another problem with Magic the Gathering's mana system. A hint of this issue can be found in Duel Masters, which has drastically fewer cards that cost 1 mana when compared to Magic the Gathering. Another hint can be found in ZX and Build Divide, which start with 2 cards already in your mana zone from the first turn of the game. The problem that all of this is hinting towards is what I call the 1 mana problem. In a linear renewable resource system, 1 mana cards are incredibly dangerous. If we look at Magic the Gathering's standard formats, this might be a bit hard to see. For example, if we look at the top 3 decks at the time of writing this video, we see that most 1-cost cards are minor defensive cards. The only proactive 1-cost card among the top 3 decks is very heavily dependent on a single archetype and is highly demanding of the deck's commitment to its archetype. It's almost impossible to play this card outside of that one specific archetype. However, if we switch our view over to the modern format, a very different picture emerges. At the top spot in the modern meta right now, blue-red Regents decks feature a full 25 1-cost cards out of only 41 non-land cards in the deck. Likewise, in the number 2 spot, burn decks are running 24 1-cost cards out of their 40 non-land cards. In both cases, that's more than half the deck taken up by cards with a single mana cost. Third place looks a little bit different, since the card it's built around relies on a gimmick that forces the deck to not have any cards that cost less than 3. It allows the deck to cheat on its mana costs in other ways. However, if we continue looking down the lists, we can see plenty of other examples of the extreme importance of 1-cost cards, such as in Death's Shadow decks, where a full 34 of the 43 non-land cards cost 1 or less. The remaining 9 cards all cost 2. There's nothing in the entire deck that costs 3 or more. In fact, if we look at all of these decks, ignoring the obvious outlier of the Stomping Footfalls deck with its very specific gimmick, the only card that costs 3 or more among all of these decks is 3 copies of Archmage's Charm that are found in the blue-red Regent decks. There is a relatively simple reason for this, and it's raw efficiency. Going from a cost of 1 to a cost of 2 is doubling the cost. Going from a cost of 1 to a cost of 4 is quadruple the cost. Incidentally, this is why high-cost cards are very rarely played in formats that have large card pools to choose from. 4-cost cards are rarely going to have 4 times the power and, most importantly, the utility of a 1-cost card. The classic example of this is that 4-cost cards are still represented by a single creature, and therefore they still die to a single removal spell. This is the classic Dies to Doomblade argument. Another way of looking at it is that on turn 3 of the game, you have the option of casting 1 3-mana spell or 3 1-mana spells. For smaller card pools, this isn't as much of an issue. It can be largely designed around, such as ensuring that 1-cost cards are heavily siloed into the types of decks they are effective in. But overall, small card pools is not exactly the defining feature of trading card games. Duel Masters and Magic the Gathering try to manage this problem by limiting the number of 1-cost cards printed. Duel Masters is much more aggressive in managing their numbers, whereas Magic the Gathering tries to focus much more on siloing its 1-mana cards into different archetypes. In either case, as long as the 1-mana cards are carefully rationed, the baseline for evaluation shifts to 2-cost cards. While moving from a 1-cost card to a 2-cost card is a doubling of the cost, or plus 100%, moving from a 2-cost card to a 3-cost card is only 1.5 times the cost, or plus 50%. In other words, just by shifting the baseline cost from 1 to 2, the efficiency drop-off as you move up the curve is half as severe. This is taken a step even further in ZX and Build Divide. In a particularly clever move, by starting the game with 2 resources already in play, the baseline cost for a turn 1 play is shifted up to 3. From here, the drop-off of efficiency from cost to cost is dramatically lower than in a 1-cost baseline system, which leaves a lot more room in the deck for higher cost and higher powered cards. If we compare the spells per turn, the difference is also quite striking. By turn 3, players are still only able to cast 1 spell per turn, whereas in the game with a 1-mana baseline, you're able to cast 3 different spells during that same turn. In this kind of accelerated start system, 1 and 2 cost cards are still just as dangerous as they are in a more traditional system, if not even more dangerous, but there's far less need for them to be designed for the game in the first place. While the efficiency of 1-cost cards is something of a problem in all resource systems, in games like Wacross with consumable resources, there are a few mitigating factors that mana systems don't have. Most importantly of them is that costs in these consumable systems already tend to have a much narrower range as a function of the system itself. In these systems, most playable effects already don't cost more than 2. Although the danger of this is that it can be somewhat limiting in terms of design space, this limitation is known from the initial creation of the game, and it can be managed through other rule systems. One example, seen in Vanguard, Wacross, and others, is a level system. A 1-cost effect at level 4 can be scaled up to be much stronger than a 1-cost effect that is accessible from level 1. This allows for a wide diversity of effect power despite a much more limited cost range. While the 1-cost problem is still dangerous for all resource systems, if you're designing for a game that features a linear renewable system that develops somewhat similar to Magic the Gathering, Duel Masters, or other games, the 1-cost problem needs to be an active consideration during development. The more 1-cost cards that are available in these kinds of games, the more pressure these cards are going to exert on all other costs. If this is left unchecked, this will ultimately become an extremely potent driver of power creep within the game. Eventually, if left to go for too long, this will start to invalidate nearly every other cost of card in the game, greatly limiting the effectiveness of a resource system as a functioning tool of card development within the game itself.